Welcome friends. This is in continuation with the database management system structure that we were discussing. So, we were talking about the structure in which these are organized. Now, we will talk about the different objects, set of different objects which are available in the database management systems. So, this is a general discussion. So, all these objects will be available in all relational database management systems. The interface may be slightly different, but if the concepts or the idea in one system has been clear, then it becomes easy to understand or comprehend any other database relational RDBMS system, right. So, basically in this we have different types of objects, like we have the tables, we have queries, we have forms, reports, and we have macros. So, what are tables? Tables are basically the structures with the primary structure where the data will be stored. So, this is the, I already said, this is the two-dimensional structure where data are stored. Then next we have the queries. Now, queries are basically the tool which is being given to the user. These are the non-procedural languages, tools which allow the user to manipulate the data, to manipulate any kind of data, or not just to manipulate the data, to define the structure and also to fetch the required data from the database. So, queries allow a multitude of functions to be carried on the data in the database. Then we have the forms. So, forms, they make data entry and display much easier. So, basically this is the tool for communication with the user, how the user can enter the data into the table. So, it is not considered a good idea to give the interface of the tables to the user. So, the data entry in the tables is actually done through an indirect tool, which is the form. So, the user only sees the forms. Once the records in the form has been saved, it automatically gets populated into the table. And of course, we have the report. So, in case of reports, the database provides an easy to understand format for information to be given to the user. So, reports can be a very good tool for providing the information to the user in the way which the user actually desires and which becomes easy for the user to comprehend and understand. So, multiple access functionalities are available, and we shall be discussing about these functionalities in the following lectures. So, basically if we say in a relational database management system, there is a specific terminology which is used. So, here we call a relation. A relation is basically a term which is used to identify the table. So, a relation is nothing but a table, and because from this word relation, here is only the term relational databases coming. It is derived from the term relation, because here data is stored in the form of tables which are called as relations. So, a table or a relation, it always has a name. In a RDBMS, a table always has a name. Then it has the attributes and it has the tuples. So, attributes are the columns and tuples are the rows. So, table is known as a relation, attributes are its columns and tuples are the rows of the table. So, basically if we see, all entities are shown as tables, and the attributes or the characteristics of these entities, they are shown as the columns or as the attributes, which are also said, and then each individual entity instance is shown as a row or as a tuple. So, basically if we see, this is in this example we can see that this is a student table. Now, what are the important characteristics or attributes of a student? It is roll number, name, marks, class, fees, so on so forth. So, all these will become the columns. Then for each student you will need to store the data. So, for each student you will create a single row. So, that single row is known as an entity instance, and the entire table is known as an entity set. So, basically you are organizing your data in the form of the most logical method, that is the real world definition of objects like characteristics and their instances. So, basically there are a few important key points to remember when we are building any database. One database can hold many tables, n number of tables can be created in a single database, and each table can hold different kinds of data. So, we have seen a table can have roll number of the student, name of the student, date of birth of the student, the fees paid of the student. So, each of this is a different kind of data. Some is text data, some is date data, some is numeric data, alphanumeric data. So, therefore, the table can hold different types of data. Data can be linked between two tables. So, this is an important aspect, that the two tables which are created, two or more tables which are created in a database, they have some common attributes, and therefore, the data in these tables is linked. So, therefore, you can also fetch data which has some common linkage between the tables, and the link between the tables is known as a relationship. So, when you create a link between the tables, it is known as a relationship. So, two tables are known, the tables are known as relations. You can have n number of tables, each table can have any amount of data and any type of data, and there is some commonality between the different tables, and this commonality is known as a link. You build a link which is also known as a relationship, right. So, if you see here, this is a simple college database that we were talking about. Now, this is a simple example in which we are saying that a college database has got 4 tables: department table, professor table, courses table and student table. Now, in this we can see that each table has its attributes, like department has department number and department name, professors have professor ID, name, department number and course. Now, you see that department number is a common attribute between the two tables, that is department table and professor table. So, in professor table, department number is used to show the department in which the professor is working. So, you can see a line has also been drawn there which represents that this is the common attribute. Similarly, you have another table called courses, which has got again course number, then it has department number and it also has professor ID, and then it has the unit. So, here this course table is borrowing attributes or has common attributes from two tables, that is department and professor, and then you also have a student table which has got the student ID, student name and course. Now, course here is actually the course ID of the course in which the student is studying. So, by this structure it is quite amply clear that different tables within a database will have common attributes. So, different tables, they have some common attributes, there is a linkage between these tables which is created. So, we will see how this linking of attributes can be done in a practical database management system, practical RDBMS system, right. So, first thing we see is how tables can be created. So, this is the simplest thing. So, on the top here you can see there is a create menu. So, you just click on create and you see tables and you create the table. Now, the table which has been created now is it is basically in the data view. Now, we need to work on the design view of the table, because at this juncture we are only designing the table, we are only defining the structure of the table. So, we need to define the structure of the table. So, we need to go into the design view. So, for design view what you need to do is you just have to right click at the name of the table and it will first ask you to save the table and then the design view will open. So, when we click here in the design view, you can see when you right click there, design view option comes, and when you click on the design view option, then the save button will come. So, the saving button is coming. So, this means that now you have to give a name to your table. So, when you are giving a name to the table gets saved and then the table gets created. So, basically in this we say that the two tables are related because certain records in the two tables are related to each other, that is certain records in the two tables are common. The records are common means the attributes are common. So, the ability to relate the records in multiple tables gives the basic power to the relational databases. So, relational databases get their power to filter data from multiple tables at the same time using the relational, the common attribute or the basic relational keys which we are going to discuss. So, basically in case of an RDBMS there are a specific few terms which are very important. So, the first term that we just discussed is called the entities and the attribute. Now, what is an entity? Entity is any real world object which, whether it is a place, a person, an event, a thing about which data is collected, right. So, entity could be, you know, basically it is any object about which data is collected. So, entity either it could be a tangible entity or it could be an intangible entity also. So, intangible entity means it is a logical entity. For example, if we say course, now course is not a tangible entity, but if I say student, teacher, then these are tangible entities. So, basically you can have any kind of entity, a logical entity or a physical entity, but the data can be stored about both these entities. Now, each entity is characterized by a set of properties. So, these are known as attributes. So, tables, what do? They hold the related entities or entity sets, and these are comprised of rows and columns. I just explained how columns are specified. Now, when we talk about attributes, attributes are also can be of different types. For example, you can have a simple attribute, like you can have the attribute like country of birth. So, this is a simple attribute which will have only one value, right. But if you have another attribute like the address, now address is actually comprising of multiple components, like you have the house number, the street name, you have the city name, you have country, so on. So, this type of attribute is known as a composite attribute or a compound attribute. Composite attribute means that it is composed of multiple components. Then there are different attributes, like you can have a single valued attribute. Single valued attribute means which will have only one value, like date of birth. But you can also have multi-valued attributes like mobile number, telephone number, email address. So, these can have multiple values because a person can have more than one email address, so on and so forth. So, you can have simple attributes, compound attributes, single valued, multi-valued. Then another important type of attribute which we see is known as the derived attribute. Now, derived attribute are basically those attributes whose values are actually calculated on some other pre-existing attribute. So, like for example, if date of birth is an attribute in the table, then you can have a derived attribute called age from the which can be calculated from the date of birth, or you have an attribute say price. So, you can calculate the attribute discount from price given the condition for that. So, basically you have different types of attributes which can be stored in the tables using multiple columns, right, and then you create these tables by rows and columns, right. So, basically if you have an entity like a student, so it will have attributes like student ID, name, course, so and so. Teacher, then you will have teacher ID, name, date of joining, department, salary. So, similarly you can have n number of different entities can be created or can be identified from the system, and each entity will have its own attribute. So, now this is the job of the database designer to identify what are the different elements, what are the different objects about which data needs to be stored, and what is the data about each object that needs to be stored. So, it needs to define, it needs to identify the entities, and for each entity the attributes also need to be identify, that is what is the data. Now, in this case there is one important aspect to be seen, that for most of the entities we see that the attribute, the single attribute has been shown as underlined and in bold. So, this attribute is the identifying attribute, that is this value of this attribute is going to identify the specific instance. For example, if you have a table which has data about 1000 students, so how do you identify each record uniquely, right? So, for that you need the student ID attribute. So, this attribute or this column will have a unique value. So, this is an identifying attribute, sometimes is also known as the key attribute, right. So, if you look at the design view of the table, so this is the design view of the table. Now, in this you have a column called the name. So, name of the attribute can be specified here, different names like student ID, student name, date of birth, course, etc. And then you also see a drop down is shown here, which helps you in choosing the data type. Now, you can see here Access provides a large number of different data types which can be stored, in which the data can be stored. So, the data type needs to be chosen correctly, and because this is going to determine how your data is going to be saved in the on the hard disk, how much space it is going to take, because one needs also to develop an efficient system which utilizes the minimum storage and maximizes the efficiency. So, different data types are there. So, a quick understanding of each of these data types. So, first is the text data type, which allows storing of text data. Alphanumeric data also comes under this. Then you have simple data called the memo. See, in text you can store up to 255 characters, but if you have a data which you know will be more than 255, for example, if you are storing the feedback, then that needs to be given more space. So, for that you can specify it as memo. Now, again the same thing comes, that if you are just storing a name, then you need not give the data type as memo, because unnecessarily storage space is wasted. Then of course, you have the number data type, which is used for integers, both signed and unsigned, and then you have date and time. Date and time is used for dates, time, etc., right, and different other types of data. Some other specific types of data base data types are also very important. For example, auto number. Now, auto number is a field which will automatically generate a new number. It is a serial wise numbers are generated in each row. So, wherever generally people feel that wherever you need to give an ID or wherever you need to give a unique identifier, auto number can be used automatically. Each time the count will be increased. Then there is another important type of data that is known as the OLE object. Now, OLE stands for object linking and embedding. So, in case of object linking and embedding type of data, wherever you want to insert some external object into the database, wherever you want to store say some photograph, or you want to store some hyperlink, or a spreadsheet needs to be inserted into the made a part of the database. So, in that case you will define the type of that specific attribute as OLE object. Then you of course can also store a hyperlink. So, for hyperlinks there is a specific category called the hyperlink object, and then you also have the lookup. So, lookup menus can also be created. Now, what are lookup menus? Lookup menus will be discussed later also. That is, you see a drop down from which out of which you can choose a specific item. So, lookup can also be chosen. So, it is very important to choose the correct type of data. Also, at the same time, it must be remembered that while you are naming the tables or you are naming the attributes, the columns, it is important to note a few important points before you name the table. That is, the table names or the field names, that is the column names, they should not have a space in between. that is they should be either continuous words or they should be having an underscore. Besides underscore, no other special sign should be used. Then there are some keywords which should not be used for defining the attributes. For example, the name. Now, wherever you are using name, you cannot use the word name for defining the attribute. You must use student name, teacher name, because name is a reserved word. So, reserved words should not be used. Spaces should not be used between the defining of the field name. It is important that you name the attributes, giving them easy to remember names, so that while you are writing the queries, it becomes easier for you to write the queries without making too many mistakes. And easy to remember, easy to write attribute names will facilitate the working on the database later on at the querying stage. So, this is how you define the attributes. So, you give the proper name following the rules that were just discussed and choosing the appropriate type of data that the attribute is going to store. Keeping in mind what data the attribute is going to store, you define the type of the data. So, basically if we look at the terminology just quickly, then we see that in case of a table oriented approach, we say that it is a table, whereas in case of a relational record oriented, we say it is a record type, and in set oriented, we say it is a relation. So, basically in relational model, we say that a table is synonymous to relation, a row is synonymous to a tuple, but it is also commonly known as a record. It is called a record because it stores the data about one specific entity instance. And then you have the column. Column is called as the attribute, but in record type it is also known as a field. So, basically these three terms or these three different names can be used interchangeably, like table, relation or record type, row, tuple or record, column, attribute or field. They will infer to the same thing. Now, if we talk about the idea or the concept of keys, right. So, in case of keys, basically what is a key? Key, we are referring to an attribute of the table. So, key consists of one or more attributes that determine other attributes, right. So, different types of keys will be discussed in the discourse of the relational database management system. The most important and the foremost that is discussed is known as the primary key. So, primary key basically is that attribute, or it is maybe a combination of attributes which are used to uniquely identify the records in a table, the rows in a table. So, I just gave the example. For example, if you have 1000 students record in a table and you want to identify each of them uniquely. So, how do you do that? You assign each student a unique ID. So, that unique ID is known as the primary key attribute for that entity, and that cannot be null. That is, there has to be an student ID assigned to each student, and that ID has to be unique for each student. So, basically we in different entities, depending upon the entity or depending upon the object for which data is being stored, you choose the attribute to be determined as the primary key. For example, in case of students, employees, it is the student ID, employee ID. In case of bank account, it is the account number. Aadhaar number can be used, ISBN number in case of books is used. So, basically the key's role is based on determination. What is determination? Basically, that is, if you are given the value of the key attribute, you can determine the value of the other non-key attributes. For example, if I give you the value of the student ID, say student ID is 10, and I ask you the value of any other attribute like the name of the student whose ID is 10 or the marks scored by the student whose ID is 10, then that can be easily determined. So, therefore, the important role played by the attribute, the key attribute, is to determine the value of the other attribute. So, it is unique identification and determination. So, key attributes help in determining the non-key attribute values in a database system, right. So, here it is important to see how you can specify, how you can make the primary key in a particular table. So, you just have to select the attribute or the field which you want to make as the primary key, and you can do it by two ways. Either on the top toolbar you can see a key is there, or you can see that you can right click and you have the option of the primary key. So, basically you can declare any attribute as the primary key, which has to follow the two constraints, that is, it has to be unique and it has to be not null. So, any attribute can be declared as the primary key attribute. Now, we can see that there will be some situations where in a particular table you will not find any single attribute which is uniquely identifiable in a table. So, in that case what needs to be done? Of course, every table needs to have a primary key. So, in that case one declares a composite key. Now, what is a composite key? That is a combination of two or even more than two attributes can be together declared as the primary key. So, this kind of key is known as the primary key. So, for example, here you can see if you have a table, say books issued. Now, in this case neither accession number nor date of issue nor borrower ID can be made the primary key, because accession number, if it is made the primary key, it means that only once the book can be issued, you cannot repeat it. Similarly, date of issue also needs to be repeated in the table, and borrower ID also. So, therefore, none of the fields qualifies to be unique. So, therefore, what is done is that accession number and date of issue are combined to form the primary key, so that the combination of the two, accession number and date of issue, as a combination they are unique. Together the value is coming to be unique. So, this is known as the composite key, that is when you combine two or more attributes to form the primary key. So, this was all about today's lecture. We shall be continuing with this in the following lectures. Till then, thank you.